Okay. I'm going to quickly take you through a bit of background on me, but not very long. I think the critical thing that you need to know is my business has been working for quite some time trying to get planning permissions. We specialize in getting planning permissions where there's a difficult environmental concept. We work with waste management companies, we work with governments. I was also a special advisor to the previous government in Britain on environmental issues and their communications. And I want to take you through some of that difficult experience, but I want to start by talking to you about the difficult area of the environment, because we've got some very esteemed colleagues here with us today on the platform, and it reminded me very much of a conference I spoke at in the UK around about 12 years ago, where we had experts on dioxins. Incidentally, dioxins is not an issue in the UK. We've done dioxins, we've moved on. I'll tell you what's going to come after dioxins, because there are 2 or 3 other things which are going to come along which are actually far more difficult to communicate than dioxins. But I'll share that with you in a minute. Once I've been through the principles of environmental communications, I want to talk about what you can do, because there is a lot that you can do, and we've had a little bit of a hint of it from the previous speaker about some of the things you could do. But anybody who was here yesterday will have heard the presentation from the gentleman from Denmark, where in Denmark they've got a long history of using energy from waste, and the population in Denmark is very positive, very pro energy from waste. And I just want to caution you about some of the approach that goes on in Denmark, because the population of Spain is not the same as the population in Denmark, and their attitude to what you're trying to do will be completely different. There is a role for Denmark in communications in Europe when trying to get energy from waste, but simply reproducing that model in Spain, and certainly in Britain, will not work. If a client of mine said to me, I'm going to build an energy from waste plant near London, and we're going to make it so that it can be a dry ski slope, like the one in Copenhagen, they would be laughed out of all planning processes in Britain. It would never happen, because nobody would take it seriously. So that attitude, that cynical attitude towards energy from waste is very important to understand. So I'll take you through that. And if we're really lucky, in around about 20 minutes' time, I will get to some conclusions. So, Proteus, we've been doing communications for quite some time. I think the critical point here is that we've done about 30 different thermal treatment processes over the years. Currently we're working on anaerobic digestion, energy from waste, but we're also working in other renewables areas as well. We're doing about 12 wind farms at the moment across the UK. And we've just launched a brand new gas-fired power station. There's a real problem in the UK with the amount of energy which we've got. We've got a great shortfall in generation of energy coming in about the next 5 to 10 years. And that gives me, as a communicator, an opportunity to talk about the positives that might come from energy from waste, with a real emphasis on the word energy rather than the word waste. And what I'm going to tell you is 3 fundamental principles which you have to take into consideration whenever you're doing communications. And I've done PR all over the world. I had the misfortune of living in America for about 3 years, where I didn't know what was going on in the rest of the world, but I lived there and I worked there. And I've also worked in South America, in Africa, the Far East, etc. And these 3 principles hold true in all parts of the world. And I'm sure it's going to be the case in Spain. And I'll share those with you, because if you can get them right, you stand a substantial opportunity of taking the population with you. And the population has a role to play in making sure that energy from waste gets built, and get built in a way which they will actually benefit from. And I'll take you through that. So in terms of principles of environmental communications, the key thing, as far as I'm concerned, is the difference between emotion and science. And I want to share with you just my own experience. I spent 7 years at 2 of the finest academic institutions in Britain. I did a degree in maths and physical geography, and then I went on to do a PhD in environmental hazard assessment. And when I came out of university, I thought I knew it all. I knew everything to do with the environment. I knew all about engineering, and I was going to save the planet. And like my namesake, St. Paul, I had a bit of a road to Damascus experience, although in this case it was the road to Dagenham, which is a bit of a dodgy town in Essex. What happened to me there completely changed my life, because it made me stop wanting to be an engineer and get into communications, where I thought the real challenge was. I designed a landfill site. It was a great landfill site. It's a bit of a dying skill these days, but it was a great hole in the ground. And my client phoned me up and said, Paul, we've got a bit of a problem with the local population. Can you come and talk to them about this landfill site that we're building? I said, yeah, no problem. So I went along to a village hall to talk to the local population, and there was about as many people at that meeting as are in this room now. And the unfortunate thing was that the room was around about a quarter of the size that this room is. And I like a lamb to the slaughter, I turned up, and it was a dark night, it was pouring with rain. And the first thing that I realized in terms of there being a problem was I couldn't get parked anywhere near this village hall. There were hundreds of cars parked outside. And I got out and I had my charts and I started walking down the road, and there was crowds of people in this tiny hall, and I said, what's going on? And this man turned around to me and he said, yeah, we've got some idiot who's going to turn up and try and build a landfill site down the road, and we're just all here to make sure it's not going to happen. So I was very confident when I strolled into that room to give my presentation. The audience gave me around about between 5 and 10 minutes before they started shouting at me. And I couldn't understand what the problem was. I mean, I was a scientist. I understood that this hole in the ground wasn't going to cause them any problems. I knew that the assessment of the number of trucks demonstrated that the roads could take the additional capacity that was going to come into this village. And I didn't understand what the problem was. And in the end, we had to get a communication specialist to come in and work with us. And as soon as I saw that there are ways that you can actually communicate to people who aren't listening, and that's the point. It doesn't matter what we're saying up here. It's whether the audience out there is actually listening to what we're saying. Well, as soon as I found that there were techniques that you could use, I thought that's the job for me. And I changed my job and gave up a very lucrative career as an engineer to become a very poor environmental consultant in communications. So, a couple of the quick points of principle. Firstly, environmental issues are not black and white. You see, when I was a kid, scientists were, well, they weren't as handsome and debonair as we've got on the platform in front of us today. Scientists had receding hairlines, big glasses, great big white coats, plenty of pens in their top pockets. And if they said the world was round, the world was round. And if they said the sky was blue, the sky was blue. But it's not like that today, because these guys can tell you that the level of dioxins that you will breathe in near an energy from waste plant will not cause you any problem at all. And I can find 100 scientists who will tell you it'll kill you. And when I turn up to speak to a member of the public who isn't sure about this, the scientist who says that the dioxin will kill you is the one that they remember. The image from today's presentations that all of you will remember when you go home is the image of that young boy who had chloroacne that you saw a bit earlier on. To a journalist, that image is worth 1,000 words and is certainly worth more than anything that any scientist would have to say about it. They'd put that image up and they would say, what a terrible danger this is, you're putting people's lives in danger, and there'll be a little inch in the newspaper at the bottom where a scientist, an esteemed scientist, will say, don't worry about it, it won't kill you. But what people are going to believe is their perception about the risk. So environmental issues are difficult to communicate because they're not black and white. This is a survey which was done in the United Kingdom where they went out and rather riskily, they asked the British population, who do you trust when it comes to the environment? And down at this end down here, we have politicians at about 4%. So there are people in Britain who do trust politicians, which is, for any politicians here, is very reassuring. Unfortunately, industry and the people who are trying to build energy from waste plants are down here at 5%. 5% of the population will believe what they have to say. And in the United Kingdom, also, we have another problem. The fourth one in is government services. 23% of people in Britain believe a government scientist. And I think the reason why that respect is so low is because we've had to live with things such as BSE and foot and mouth over the last few years. So if you go to meet local people and bring along somebody who's representing, say, the Environment Agency to say that this plant is entirely safe, only 1 in 4 people are going to believe a word they say. So we have to take this into consideration. The people who they do trust are the people down the far side, these interesting people called independent scientists and green organizations. And if you can find me an independent scientist, I'd like to take them home with me. The reality is that if I employ a scientist to stand up and speak on my behalf to a local population, the population immediately start filtering what he has to say because they perceive his vested interest. He's been paid by me to speak to them. Which means that if somebody else turns up who has not been paid by the developer, they're more likely to believe him. Green organizations down that far end, which is organizations like Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace, are the people they really believe because they don't perceive a vested interest in these organizations. In Britain, it's taken me 15 years to get the trade body for the waste industry to actually sit in a room with Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth. Outrageous. We should have been having dialogue with these people a long time ago. We know what the problem is. They don't like end-of-pipe technologies to dispose of waste.